Well, hello there, YouTube, and I would say welcome to a cat stream, but today is not a cat stream. Today is just a normal little live stream that I have with one of my very old friends that I haven't seen for quite a while, which is Waldsmith Stories. Obviously, you know that he has another channel now, and he's doing quite well with that channel, and we're very thankful for that. Waldsmith Stories normally has a lot to say, so I'm very happy to have him here today. We're going to be doing a little talk on immigration. And no, we're not having a talk on whether refugees are refugees or whether immigrants are immigrants. We're actually going to be talking about the actual ideas, the actual implementation of the ideas, as in open borders versus kind of a barrieristic or a border points. So people either would come across and be vetted, or some people would be able to come straight through. So it's kind of the ideas of said immigration, how some of them are good, how some of them are bad, what can be better. And in truth, towards the end, we'll get to the actual premises of what we feel ourselves would be a good idea for implementing the ideas of immigration, whether it would be mass or selective immigration. With me sucking up all the air, as I said, I would like to reintroduce one of my good friends, Welshman Stories. So, Welshman, if you would like to take this time just to promote yourself and your channel, then please do.
Good evening, Common Sense. First, let me thank you for inviting me, and it's a very interesting topic. Yeah, the Weltschmerz Stories channel does not really exist anymore. I mean, it is online, but I'm not working on it anymore. I switched to a completely German audience, and yeah, you can tell from my accent that I'm German. So yeah, let's talk about immigration and free borders and so on. I mean, interesting idea.
Yeah, I mean, we have really two sort of opposing views. I mean, you do have people at this moment in time are probably what you would classify as centrists, where you would have the idea of having a sort of an open border, but with having open borders with countries that already have their own borders themselves, so they kind of take up the slack of having the borders. So, for instance, an EU type of model, where once you're inside the EU, you have the freedom of movement, so to speak, as they actually say, or you have the opposite end of those two spectrums, where you have either complete and utter open borders, where everybody's allowed to travel everywhere, or you have a border policy where everybody has to be vetted and security checks have to be made before you're even allowed to enter the country. I have my premise and I have my preference. What would be your preference on that sort of ideas or ideologies, or what you understand of them?
I mean, from a human perspective, I totally love the idea of open borders and everybody can move everywhere and so on. So, but from an economic perspective, I have a completely different view. So let's say like a German or yeah loves England and wants to go to England and work there because of the culture and everything. I totally understand that, and I'm in favor of such a system. Or the other way around, a British man says, I come to Germany, whatever. But this is not the reality. In reality, people from poorer countries with lower living standards move to countries like Germany, like England, and so on, to have like a better economic standing. And that is the reality. People are not changing moving to other countries because of the culture. They are moving there because of economic reasons. And in my opinion, that's not really working. But from a human standpoint, I totally love the idea, but it is not all about humans. It is also about economics. So
No, I completely and utterly I'm with you on that aspect. I'm actually going to take a very, very leftist opinion on this point, and this is actually my point. I'm not trying to.
That's a good thing.
I know, but this is actually my honest opinion on it, and I'm not trying to shield to anybody, and I'm not trying to pretend to be anything to oppose to different people's views. This is actually a view that I will actually hold. I don't care where you come from. I don't care if you come from Africa. I know you don't either. I don't care where you come from. I don't care where you're going. If you're going to actually benefit the country that you're going to, whether it just be on the process of trying to make a better life for yourself and pay taxes and be able to do that. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with that aspect of open borders. The problem that I have with open borders is a process that you can't actually count how many people are coming in. So as you were alluding to, if you had very, very low skilled people coming in from Northern African states or other states of similar ilk, so similar stature, you would also have people coming in with very low skills. That means the people in your own countries, whether you be in Spain, Portugal, Germany, Italy, UK in general, you would actually have the low skilled workers in that country fighting and vying for positions and places to actually be able to work. So for me, that's where open borders don't work. It's fine being able to have it for more of an elitist type of idea. So for people that were maybe earning 20 to 30 grand a year type thing, where you have middle management qualifications, for instance, it would work for them because you could mix and match with the different jobs. Some people will go from Germany to England, some will go from England to Italy and vice versa. But if you have a mass influx of low skilled workers going from one place to another place to another place to another place, all you're doing is replacing the low skilled workers that you already have in the countries you already are in. So that's why I don't think open borders really work on that aspect.
Yeah, I think you are generating more and more unemployed people, and they naturally have influence on the prices of the people who are at work. You know what I'm saying? I mean, the wages get worse and worse, or get no increase at all, because you have like such a massive amount of people unemployed, and every employer will tell you, so if you don't want to do the job, I hire somebody else. There are enough out there, so it's not beneficial for anybody.
Yeah. Apart from, so surprisingly, because obviously the ideologies of most people that like open borders, and yes, I'm generalizing, so please shoot the messenger because it's me that's saying this. But most people that have the ideologies of open borders are people that have socialistic or communistic ideologies in themselves, as in the idea of changing the ideas of capitalism in itself. But they're producing the idea of open borders, but all they're doing to actually help open borders is not helping the little guy or the people that they claim to be helping. It's actually helping the capitalists in themselves, or what they classify as the capitalists, because only middle management and people who are in factories and that type of ilk are actually benefiting from the idea of open borders. Nobody else is.
Yeah. And I mean, even for the people who come to a different country and get a well-paid job, it is not even beneficial for them. So I can tell you like a little anecdote, and it's just my personal story. I was living in the UK for a few years, and even in Canada and China and so on. And I work in the film industry. And in Europe, there was only one place for the film industry, and that was London. So if you want to work in feature film, you had to go to London. So obviously, there were not enough British people to do this job. And so like at least 50% came from like a lot of French people, Spanish, you name it, all over Europe. And if we wouldn't have open borders, we would have the film industry all over in Europe, because there are not enough British to do the job. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we are hurting ourselves by going abroad and working there. If everybody would stay in their home country, then we would have at least a small industry. But since we are all leaving, yeah, there's no point in like having a film industry in Germany, because we can all go to London and work there.
No, I mean, you can transmute that to, or extrapolate that, should I actually use. You could extrapolate that to actually any sort of industry. For instance, you could use it as a car industry, obviously going back onto Germany. Germany having the biggest forms of car manufacturing, as well as obviously some of the Scandinavian countries. And it's a case of everything goes through every different point. So a tyre will go through England or wherever to get to Scandinavia, and then from Scandinavia it will go to Germany to be fit on. That's different to migration. That's freedom of movement in the classifications of economics, as in economical free movement, which means no sanctions, which is fine, but those are dealt on trade deals. And without going too far into that, the trade deals that are done for economics should not be done on the idea of people, of freedom of movement.
Exactly.
Freedom of movement is not the same as taking a screw from Screwfix in London and taking it all the way down to Germany to fit into a car, or taking it all the way down to Italy to fit onto a boat.
Yeah, people are not spare parts. I mean, that is the point.
Exactly.
People are people, and spare parts are spare parts, and that is different. And we shouldn't treat them equally, because they are not.
No, that's exactly right. That's where I was completely not going with that. The fact is that some people see people as you quite rightly just said, spare parts. So the idea of having free movement, yes, it helps the lowest people coming into the countries, but it doesn't help the people that are already in these countries. For instance, I'll use the UK, for instance, because I know UK the best. I'm sure this is anecdotally correct in most countries, or most westernized countries, but I know this to be fact in our country at least. The fact is that we are having extremely high portions of homelessness that is now being affected on a daily basis, and is increasing higher and higher on a daily basis. Now, does that mean that there is a correlation in my mind to do with homelessness and to do with the idea of immigration? Yes. The reason why I think this is because if you didn't have such a high mass immigration, and notice I say in mass, meaning a heavy amount of numbers, you would be able to deal with these situations as a case-by-case basis and be able to help the people that actually want their help, realizing that not all homeless people actually want their help in the first place, so you can't actually get rid of homelessness in general. But you can help the people that actually want help from it. But because we're taking in lower class workers and lower skilled workers, to the point where you are taking in people that have no qualifications whatsoever, and also people that cannot even speak the native language they're going to, hence why I would never emigrate to a non-English speaking country, because I'd be fuck all useful to them. But that's the point. In most of these countries, and at least in the UK in itself, the reason why the homelessness is going up is simply because they are giving the housing to people that are mass emigrating, which means there's no houses for people that are veterans. There's no houses for people that have problems, that can't keep a job and things like this, that are on housing waiting lists. And then because of the place and the tendency that we're in has run out, have now gone to be homeless. Mass immigration in itself does not help the indigenous people of any country, to the point of the mass immigration is coming from Northern African countries, is not helping the African countries. You're actually making them even worse, because you're losing the people that could work for the country to make them better. The country is only as good as the people that they have in it. So educate the people that they have in it, and then the country will get better. You don't do it by separating the country from class to class or from stature to stature. You elevate the lowest stature to the highest stature, and you do that by education, not by immigration.
I think you spoke about like two different problems, and the first thing I would say is like a very British problem that most people in Europe don't really see, and that is if you pick a country to go, then it would be a country where you speak the language, and that makes the UK especially interesting. Because I mean, nobody speaks German, nobody speaks. A few speak French, and a few speak Spanish. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, that is the easiest language to learn. Maybe most people learned it at school already, and so it's a natural decision to say, "Oh yeah, of course we go to England." Yeah, and nobody really wants to go to Norway. I mean, their economic system is fantastic, but nobody speaks the language. So, and it's especially the British have to deal with this problem. And I can totally understand that a lot of people saying enough is enough. You can't ship everybody to England. Yeah. So
I'm completely with you. I would say with the idea of, as you brought up before we went on, most westernized civilizations, for instance, as you said, most rich Scandinavian countries, most European countries, most westernized European countries, like i.e. France, your Spain's, your Italy's, your Germany's, your Austria's, your Belgium's, your Luxembourg, blah, blah, blah. Most of them have elements of being able to speak English. Not general populace, but generally they would understand English in itself. For some reason, it's turned into a universal language. I can't.
Yeah, even if it's like gibberish, but at least you understand roughly what the people are talking about. So that's a starting point.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly where I was going. So somebody from England should be able to, in theory, emigrate to somewhere like Scandinavia, and should be able to emigrate to somewhere like Germany, as you quite rightly said many times before. It's just for me that if you have, as you said as well, if you have people that do not speak the language in itself and do not understand the language in itself, how can anybody expect those people to actually make any sort of benefit for them in a country that they don't even understand the language that they're in, where they can't have a conversation with their employers because they don't speak the language? So how can they even work?
Yeah.
That doesn't benefit them. It doesn't benefit anybody. It just puts them socially completely and utterly ostracized.
Exactly.
Until they learn the language, if they ever learn the language.
I mean, the thing is, I mean, you know me, you know that I am a lefty and so on. But in Germany, we were talking about these immigration tests. Yeah, that people have to prove that they speak our language, that they understand our culture, and so on. And this idea is mostly connected to the right or far right in Germany.
Sure.
But honestly, in my opinion, that is the least you can expect. I mean, you travel to another country, you want to work there, so you have to speak the language. I mean,
yeah. No, I'm completely not with you on that. Obviously, people. This is where we have to get into definitions. Unfortunately, very, very quickly. Obviously, people would not expect refugees to be able to do this, because that is a completely different situation to migrants and economical migrants. But we would expect this completely and utterly for migrants, which is what 90% of the, or let's do be conservatives, 80% of the people that are traveling across, at least 80% of them are economical migrants. There are hardly any refugees actually from war-torn countries. And if they are, we should take them in as the refugee status actually standardized.
I mean, the question is, I mean, if you are a refugee, and I can totally understand and I support the refugees and everything, it's all good and fine. The question is, should you have, for example, like a work permit? That would be a question. I mean, if you can prove you speak the language, if you can prove you are beneficial to the society and to the country and so on, then yes, why not? Yeah, but like getting a work permit only to be then an unemployed, that makes no sense for me whatsoever.
Well, it's kind of like, I don't know if you have this over in Germany or in Europe itself. We have for building sites what we classify as a CSCS card, which is basically a health and safety card, meaning you understand the health and safety of the building site or site that you're going on to. You can quite easily translate that, or you can quite easily implement that as an idea of being able to work or enter the country in itself. Do you understand basic health and safety? Do you understand basic cultural references? Do you understand this and that? And use that as an idea of being able to implement people and actually to be able to work. I think the first thing that anybody that is going for benefits in itself should be able to prove the fact that they have intentions to work. And the way that I mean this, so I can quickly finish, is that if you have intentions to work, then you should learn the language in the country that you're going to, whether that be Spanish, German, Norwegish, or English. If you're in those countries, you should not be forced, but you should be able to prove that you are actually looking for work. Go to an English lesson class so you can learn basics of English. Go to a German class to learn basics of German if you're in those countries, and so on and so forth. That proves the fact that you are looking for work at least.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm absolutely with you. Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. And I think the Canadians and the United States, they have kind of these laws in place, right? You have to, I mean, it was not in my case. I don't know why, but when I moved to Canada, they just gave me the work permit, but I already had a contract before I went there.
It might be the fact that the business that you were working for might have already applied for everything for you. Sometimes they do that. They do that for what they call exchanges. When I was younger, I was going to be a plumber, and I wanted to emigrate to either Australia or to Canada. To be fair, I still actually do want to emigrate to some country. I'm not sure where yet, but I don't want to stay in England.
Go to Australia. It's England with nicer weather. Don't go to Canada.
I prefer Canada because I like the cold.
Okay.
I like cold. I prefer cold. And not every animal is trying to kill me. It's just bears and wolves. But no, they actually put, if you show them your qualifications for being a plumber or being whatever, a doctor or a nurse or whatever, they actually help you pass immigration or get your visa, especially for obviously in Australia, get your green card, so to speak, a hell of a lot quicker than what you would do if you applied for it yourself.
Right, yeah.
So I do know that they do that, but I still find out that we're still going on this idea and premise of working on open borders rather than maybe wouldn't it be a better idea to be able to stop the people from coming in first of all, to actually have borders to begin with?
Yeah. I'm in favor of this idea of a border, of having a border. And to be honest, I mean, when I travel to, I don't know, Spain, France, or wherever, I had no problem with showing my passport. And when I was living in England, I always had to show my passport at the French English border. Didn't bother me at all. I mean, what is the problem?
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you on that. It's the same thing for some people that use the idea of open borders for traveling away on holiday. To touch on the idea of Brexit, some people actually use that as an excuse for voting to stay in. Now, whether you want to stay in or stay out is not the issue. But if you're going to use the idea of being able to travel between different countries freely is the whole reason of staying in the economical and bureaucratic system, then there's something wrong with you.
No, and I mean,
there's so many reasons for and against.
I mean, but selling selling the whole idea of Europe with the only point like you don't need to show your passport when you go for vacation, that is ridiculous. If this would be the only reason for Europe, then we should skip it right away. My opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, but obviously there's other reasons to go through on that idea, but for me it's just silly, the fact that we have the ideas of open borders, but even people that are at least sympathetic to the idea of open borders still say that we have to have some form of security, whether it would be a border check or it would be a citizen check, so to speak, or a cultural check. They still have this idea of being able to implement some sort of check, some sort of stopping and working out who they are and what their points are. Surely that's the whole idea of a border then, so you could do that non-discriminatively rather than discriminatively pointing out that you're an immigrant.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, even before the European Union, it was not particularly difficult to work in England. Yeah, as a European, I mean, if you apply and say, okay, I'm doing a job that is kind of rare in the country, then it was very easy to come to the. I mean, even Karl Marx was living in England, so you are a pretty open society, I would call it.
Yeah, we did have an open society. It's a shame he didn't use that openness to look at a factory. Anyway. No, but I do. That's the reason why I wanted somebody that was even more leftist than what you are. I wanted somebody on that was completely and utterly pro open borders, because for me, I'm going to use my name as a pun here, but you do have too much common sense, even in the idea of open borders in your definition, so to speak. Because even though you say you want open borders, you want open borders for westernized countries and countries that have similar cultures. So it still means that you would have borders for some people.
And similar living standards.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
If you would open the border between, let's say, the United States and Mexico, then Mexico would be empty. There would be nobody, nobody would stay in Mexico. So you know what I'm saying? I mean, but if you open the border between Canada and the United States, there you wouldn't see any shift at all.
If you did, it would be marginal, and it would only be why it first happened.
Yeah.
No, I'm completely with you on that aspect. People that have similar culturalistic, morals, to make it easier for everybody, similar morals and similar perspectives on life and similar understandings of what we classify as morals, then most people would understand the idea of the transfer of people, so to speak, the immigration in itself. But for me, I still feel that we should still have borders in itself, even with situations like that. Because if somebody was to be able to get a plane to Canada, for instance, and was able to make a little bit of a life in Canada and then invited other people in, and was able to get other people in, yes, I know it's a hypothetical, and it still works because this is what actually happens anyway. As people invite more people to come in, and more people come into the country, and then eventually they go, oh, we can cross the border. We can use this. So I still like the ideas of having border checks and having everything that we've already discussed. The idea of making sure that people can speak the language that they're going to, for instance, making sure that they understand different cultural cues. For instance, obviously in Germany, you can't use the Zikao at all, otherwise, or wear the swastika, because it's completely not banned. Now, if you didn't know that, like what happens quite a lot to Chinese and Japanese people, Japanese more than Chinese, you get arrested for it.
All right.
So you need to understand the culture in the country that you go into, and I think that's best done at borders. I think you could quite easily, similarly, but not entirely the same, but similarly, you could do sort of a detention centre. Change obviously the name, because you're not trying to detain them to make sure that they lose of liberty, but you could quite easily do that where you house them and you can actually work out if they understand the culture and if they're here for good purposes or not, and do some sort of DNA testing to make sure that the children that are with people are blah, blah, blah. All those type of things. You can make sure that you're sticking to your humanitarian rights and humanitarian issues, but making sure that nobody's taking the piss out of the country and the people that are trying to get into it as well.
Yeah.
Because they're all potential citizens as well. So you have to look after the people that are trying to come in as well as the people already in.
Yeah. I mean, the whole refugee situation, I mean, that is a whole different story, in my opinion. I mean, yeah, I can totally understand that people don't want to die in their countries. And I can also understand the people, these economic refugees, that they come with the same stream of people. I totally understand that, but yeah, it's difficult how to handle this situation. I mean,
I've got a question for you, and it's only opinion based, so nobody go over the top if somebody says something that's wrong in your idea. But obviously, you're mentioning the actual refugee crisis, which actually isn't a refugee crisis. Most people are from Northern Africa, and most people are from other countries in the Middle East and not actually from Syria. I think there's only something like 13, 14, 15, maybe up to 20% as a conservative issue. No, actually from Syria, and around about 80% of them are actually men of fighting age as well. But most people from Africa and from those other countries that are coming across the Mediterranean in boats that are being smuggled by people smugglers. How would you react to some people saying that when we do catch them and stop them from sinking, which we should do, we should definitely stop them from sinking. Nobody wants anybody to die. Nobody deserves to die for being a refugee or a migrant. So we agree on that bit. But should they be taken to a port in Europe, or should they be taken back to a Northern African country where they come from?
That is really a difficult question. I mean, the first thing is I would sink all the boats after, of course, rescuing the refugees, you know what I'm saying. But yeah, everybody who smuggles people, their boats should be sunk, and that is it. And they should be arrested straight away. So no doubt about that. But I mean, you said, I mean, they are like 20% from Syria.
Roughly, I think that's an overestimate personally, but
I don't have the numbers, so I have to trust you on that. And however, and I know there are a lot of people from Afghanistan.
Yeah,
and it's not even considered to be a war zone, which is ridiculous, because what are our soldiers doing there if that is not a war zone? So they can then get them back. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
The reason why it's not classified as a war zone is because there's no sanctioned war that's going on. That's the reason why it's no longer classified as a war zone.
Yeah, but then, as I
I'm not saying that you're incorrect. I'm just saying the reason why it's not is because there's no important word sanctioned war going on.
Yeah. But I mean, I personally can totally understand why people are coming from places like Afghanistan or Yemen or whatever. If they declare as a war zone or not does not matter, in my opinion. As long as we are bombing these places, for me it's perfectly fine that they come here. And yeah, that's a difficult situation. I mean, you can't hold back like all 100% when you know there is a percentage of people who really have reasons to leave their country.
I'm with you. No, that's the thing that I was trying to suggest. I mean, that's the bit why we went over the differences between refugees and the idea of migrants. Now, if you're a migrant, you have the right to apply to come into Europe. You have the right to apply. Nobody's saying that.
And that is a good thing. I mean, I don't want to stop migrants or migration at all. I don't want to stop it. But there must be rules. There must be rules, and you apply for it, and then you get the permission or not. And if you don't get the permission, then that's it.
Agreed. No, surprisingly enough, from somebody who's probably right of politics and somebody who's left of politics, we're actually agreeing a hell of a lot, which I didn't think was going to happen too much. So I'm quite impressed of our civility at this moment in time. But I think that's what comes with conversations. We understand different people's points of views rather than going on dogma, going on the ideas of what other people suppose other people think. I can see that obviously somebody in the chat says stop it 100%. There is no way ever that you would stop migration 100%. How else would you go on holiday if you go abroad on holiday? How else would you want to work if your son or daughter wanted to work abroad? If you stop it one way, you have to stop it the other way. It doesn't work to the point where you go, well, you're banned from our country, but we still want to use yours. It doesn't work that way. Yeah. Immigration is a two-way street. If you want to go to their country, you have to be able to let them come to ours.
And there is nothing wrong. And there is nothing wrong with immigration. I mean,
exactly.
I mean, it's to our benefit. If we have people well educated, willing to work here, they are paying into our social security systems. They are paying into our retirement systems, and so on. That is a good thing. There's nothing against it.
All right, this is another thing that me and somebody on the left actually agrees with. They're not pot shots. It's just a clarification. But that is the point. We do agree on this. Immigration in itself does work for the country. Now, I think me and Workspace would actually disagree on the levels of migrations that we would assume that the country should accept, and it should be different from every country as well, because every country has different land masses, for instance.
Of course, yeah.
So I say that they should be different. There shouldn't be a set number for the whole of Europe to accept in every places, because let's be honest. The UK does not fit into France less than 3 times. It's kind of a bit of a bigger place.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, the other thing with the immigration is that, I mean, I personally have the opinion. I mean, we have at the moment in Germany, we have roughly 1.5 million refugees here in Germany. And I personally have the opinion that we could easily carry like 1 million every year for the next 10 years. That wouldn't be a problem. But it would be a political problem, because in that case, we would have like Adolf Hitler again. You know what I'm saying? That is, I mean, the society as a whole don't want to have so many refugees. And you have to take that into account as well. I mean, if the whole society flips into one political spectrum where you don't want to go, then that's not a good thing either. And you have to keep that in mind as well. It's not only an economic question, it's also a political question. Yeah, at the moment, I mean, in Germany, it is terrifying. We have the AfD, that is the far right, and they have like the last election was like 13 or 15% or something like that. And that is really a Nazi party, and we really have to call it that way.
Who is? What is? Sorry.
The AfD, the German party AfD, it's called Alternative for Germany. And that is really a very, very, very right-wing, almost Nazi party. And they gained 15% from nothing. Because
they didn't gain 15%. They didn't gain 15% from nothing. They gained 50% because certain parties didn't want to talk about immigration, and other parties did want to talk about immigration. To be honest, I don't know enough about German politics solely to be able to go into that. But it's the point that even say, for instance, UKIP is classified as a racist party, for instance.
Yeah, but it is not really, because it deals with different, in my opinion. So yeah.
Yeah, but I'm just using it as a clarification point for people to understand that that's how far right. I mean, I know the AfD is classified as even further right.
Yeah.
But it's just for other people to gain an idea. They're about as far right as you could politically be without being chucked out of politics, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that's where the AfD is in Germany. And for me, it's a case of you can't. The reason why UKIP got so popular wasn't just because they wanted to stop migration. It's because they were having the conversation. They were entertaining the idea as what they can do to stop it, what they can do for the idea of leaving Europe, for instance, as well, which was another major issue for UKIP's meteoric rise. I'm still trying to suggest that it's a case of, if you have the conversation, people will come to you to have the conversation. It doesn't mean that they support your ideas 100%, but because they support you heavily on the idea of immigration, they will vote you in for the ideas of immigration. And that's where the left and left-leaning parties completely underestimate how important immigration is to normal working class people.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's why conversations like this is so important.
That is actually a problem that I have with the left. I almost agree on every point with them, but when it comes to immigration, I have a problem, not because of the refugees themselves. I'm not afraid of a refugee, but I'm afraid of the German reaction on the refugees. You know what I'm saying? It's like, yeah.
No, I completely understand. Well, when Waldschmidt means German reaction, he doesn't mean the German people's reaction. He means the reaction to Germany, as in cultural disintermediate. Basically, the loss of simple cultures, the loss of economics, the idea that workers aren't able to work where they should be working, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Which is the same thing for most people that like the idea of immigration. It's the same thing for people that, even in the chat, that are saying that 100% of people are on benefits, are on this and on that. I agree with you. I know that a lot of people are on that type of thing, especially with the influx of immigration that's happened recently. I'm completely and utterly with you. There's a reason why they're on benefits, though. It's not just the idea of what we said before, that they like the idea of benefits from us, which is probably around about 80% right, to be fair, or 70% right. And yes, it's an estimate or a guesstimate. But it's still the case of 100% of them that are on benefits, that are just come across to the country, probably don't speak the actual language that they've come into the country for. So for a start, they've already ostracized themselves, and the country's ostracized them as well, simply because they can't speak the language. They can't go off and get a job. You can't force somebody that can't speak the language to get a job. because they don't understand what they're agreeing to. They don't understand what they're doing.
Yeah.
What you can do, though, is why they're on the benefits, is to make sure that they actually keep the benefits, is by going and obtaining an English or Spanish or whatever country they're in, the native country's language, to be able to speak it, to understand it, to be able to communicate in it, to read, to write in it. And then that way, you're not just having that generation fuck up, so to speak. You're actually helping the next generation, because if that generation of immigrant is then partially learn English or Spanish or whatever country they're in, they'll be able to teach their children what the country is, the language and everything else like that. They won't be ostracized and form their own communities. They will integrate more. And that's the problem with mass immigration. They don't integrate because they form their own societies because they don't speak the language. Where if you have integrated immigration or slowed down immigration, you are able to assimilate, so to speak, to the culture that is taking you in. For instance, in the 70s and 80s, we had high levels of Hindus that moved into the country. We had high levels of Indians moving into the country, or South Asians moving into the country. They integrated. They formed their own businesses. Yes, they built their own religious sects, but that's fine. That's the point of secularism, to be able to follow any religion that you want to, if you do follow religion. But that's the idea. They integrated. The level of mass immigration has been implemented in the whole of Europe. Will never be able to integrate because there is too many. They will form their own societies, and they will make London stand. They will make Berlin stand. They will make their own areas and social constructs. They will make their own social.
Yeah, but I'm not sure if I agree with you there, because I mean the Indians in England, or the Turkish people in Germany, I mean they still live in their own areas. They still treat with each other and so on. They keep their culture and so on. And I can see that in England, and I can see that in Germany. And
I can't speak for Germany, but I can speak for the UK, and I know lots of South Asians, as in Indians, and I know a lot of Hindus in themselves. I also know a lot of other Asians that have come over and have been able to integrate absolutely perfectly. They know our culture better than some of the people that are actually born and bred here, and they actually don't form their own societies or their own areas. They generally move to the areas where they want to, more affluent areas, and they look after themselves. In fact, some of the people that are third and fourth generation migrants are actually more British and more English than the people that are born here.
All right. That's interesting. I had a different impression when I was living there, but all right. Yeah.
You lived in London, though, didn't you?
Near London, yeah.
Yeah. But I suppose it's like trying to say, well, if you live in Berlin, then you're doing the city. But if you live just outside of Berlin, it's a completely different lifestyle.
Yeah, that's probably correct. Yeah.
So I keep on using Berlin because it's one of the only fucking countries, it's the only towns that I know in Germany.
Yeah, no, but you are right. I mean, Berlin was the third largest Turkish city in the 70s. There was Istanbul, Ankara, and then Berlin. And there were whole parts of the city were completely where everybody was speaking Turkish and so on.
Yeah, so on. Yeah. I'm completely with you. But that's the thing where we're going on this. Even if you have borders or you don't have borders, if you deal in the idea of mass immigration, which unfortunately Open Borders does promote and would entice people to do, it would be a case that they would form their own communities. No matter where they're from. It doesn't matter where they're from. Somalis would form their own Somali communities, Afghans would form their own Afghani communities, and so on and so forth. The same as when English people go to Spain, for instance. You go to Little England, you go to Little London, where you can find all English restaurants and things like that, which the Spanish people have put on for themselves, or people that have moved over to there have done. And you can find little pockets of each and every single country when you go on holiday to a place.
And that is pretty normal. I mean, you can find that all over the globe. I mean,
exactly.
Look at America with the German communities there and so on.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But you've got the Polish community that is extremely heavy over in America. You also have, obviously, the Italian culture, the Irish culture.
Yeah.
all very, very heavy. But the point that I was making was it doesn't matter on immigration what levels you have it. It's still a case of they will form communities. But the difference in the communities, if you have higher immigration, is that it's forced upon them because they're ostracized because they can't speak the language. Where if it's smaller, they are not ostracized because they have to learn the language to be able to interact with other people.
Yeah.
So they have to learn it. So it's a case of they either adapt to the language or they move away again. Now, that's not saying that I want them to move away. It's just saying that that's how humans react. We adapt. That's just in our nature. If we have to learn another language to adapt in the area so we can have social interactions, we will fucking do it.
Yeah.
But if we don't, then why would you change something you don't need to change? Excuse me.
But it's also, I mean, language is definitely a very important thing, but it's also the culture. I mean, when I was living in England, I really loved the English culture. I would go there like right away. I really loved it. But I could never connect to the Canadian culture, which is completely different from the British.
Yeah.
And so I had to leave. But that is a problem that I see with all the migrants. They cannot really connect with the culture, but they do not leave either because they know that is their social, they are socially going down the drain when they go back to their original countries. You know what I'm saying? I mean, they are not really free to leave because
And
of
the money
the
doesn't help
completely
either.
different living standards and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The money side of things doesn't help if they're already on benefits, especially in the UK or France or in Germany.
Yeah. Another thing that I hear from employers is that they say, yeah, even if we find people that can speak the language and that are kind of well trained and so on, we don't want to invest in these people because we don't know how long they can stay. They are allowed to stay. Yeah, you're employing somebody, and then once he knows the company and everything, like 2 or 3 years later, then they have to go. So they don't want to invest in these people. That's another problem that I see.
Yeah, I don't know what it's like in Europe in that aspect, but generally when we have immigration from African and Middle Eastern countries, generally, which is not a problem if they were making societal expansion, so to speak, and helping society, which wouldn't be a problem. But generally, I see them as staying for a long, long time. Eastern Europeans, I'll agree with you that a lot of them don't necessarily stay. They normally stay for 2 to 3 years, get some money put together, send some of the money back to their home as well from mum and pa or whatever. They generally buy a house out there and they generally buy a car and whatever, and then they set. So I know that happens that way for Eastern Europeans, but from my experience with Middle Eastern and Northern African immigrants, they tend to stay for a very long time. Hence why we normally talk about second and third and fourth generation immigrants.
Yeah, but at that point, then they have a British passport and so on. Then they are allowed
they still don't speak English. That's the point I was making before. Because they're in their communities, and in some cases with faith schools and things like that, for Northern African and Middle Eastern people, immigrants, I'll get there. They tend to have their own sort of faith schools and things like that. So they actually learn the language, they learn their language, should I say, and they've formed their own communities in themselves, again, which either forces them not to learn the language or ostracizes them anyway, and is a breeding pot for radicalization anyway. And that's why you normally find most terrorists that are of that faith and ilk are normally second and third generation. They're generally not first generation immigrants.
All right. I can't say anything to that because in Germany it's strictly, we have German schools, German language, and you can't speak German, then you have to learn it. There is no way around it. So when you are second generation, then you speak the language perfectly and you are integrated in everything.
I have no complaints with that whatsoever. That should be mandatory for every European country. There's a reason why immigrants are coming to the country in the first place. And as we said at the beginning, That's to get a better life. Whether you agree with the premise or not, is to get a better life. So they should be not forced, but they should be socially coerced into learning the languages and learning the culture that they're going to. Otherwise, why else would they be trying to gain entrance into the country in the first place?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the problem is that, I mean, we have to change our politics on Africa too. I mean, that is, I mean,
have you heard what the EU are doing for the refugee? I say refugee because they're not calling them what it is. They're economical migrants for a start. They're not refugees.
Yeah, but that is in most cases that is also our fault.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, I mean, we are treating Africa really badly. We are exploiting them like crazy. We are destroying their industries and so on. And that is all made from Europe, America, and so on. And we have to stop this too. I mean, that is kind of a problem.
The European Union in itself should let everybody else that's in Europe trade with Africa rather than stopping the trade from Africa.
Yeah.
I agree with you on that. Because it's a European Union and it actually says that we're not allowed to take any deals from Africa.
Yeah.
So I completely and utterly agree with you on that. So what you're actually saying is rather than us actually exploiting the country, we're not actually using the country. We're not actually integrating them into the idea of capitalism and free trade. In that aspect. Because we're not allowed to trade with Africa at all. We're not allowed to make our own trade deals with them at all.
Well, but we are having trade deals with Africa, but
only what the EU legislates that we're allowed to have.
Exactly, and that is the problem. Only on restricted products and so on, and that is the problem.
Which is nothing. Not to go into the process of the EU. I'm sure we can do that on another stream and another day. But the EU in itself restricts heavily what we're allowed to trade with America and well, they do that as well, but mainly to do with Africa, as we're talking about Africa. But they heavily restrict everything to do with Africa in itself. They don't let us trade freely with Africa. They're only doing it with the deals that already were implemented. And those deals, as you do say, and I agree with you, do exploit the actual people that are already there. I would say that if they were able to have more of a free trade and be able to decide what they want to do and how they want to do it, they would actually be able to get rid of their totalitarian governments, in some cases, and most cases, dictatorial governments, and actually be able to trade freely, and that would actually increase the wealth of most African nations. For instance, most African nations actually are still in mud huts. Now, that's not a point onto them saying that they're below us and we shouldn't help them in general. It's the point to say that the governments that there actually are there that are supposed to try and help their people are not helping their people. There's a reason for that. You have to start with a foundation to build a house. You don't throw money at a house to try and level a house that has no foundation.
Well, yeah, that is kind of true, but I mean, again, at the same time, like we have our huge, like for example, fishing fleets at the shores of Africa. I mean, European fishing fleets, and they're catching in an industrialized way all the fish from the African coasts.
I agree.
We should stop these things.
I completely agree.
Or like African countries that can only trade cotton and nothing else, and they ruin the whole what is it, soil? What is the name for it? The ground. When you only grew one kind of, then you ruin the language barrier, lost in translation.
Oh, I know what you lose then the fertility of the soil.
Exactly. So yeah, but they can't grow whatever they want. They have to grow what we want them to grow.
Yeah, and that's the same for all out the EU. I would say Africans themselves, I mean, they're really good at growing oranges. I know that much. Obviously, to do well, actually, no, we get most of our bananas from Jamaica, don't we? Anyway, to go on to the point that I was mentioning was what you said about the fishing regulations. Now, that's done to completely and utterly ostracize Africa. Now, if you quite rightly said, if we were to relinquish African waters back to Africa, then they would be able to subsidize their own country, vice versa, actually subsidizing us as well. So it would actually be in our benefit to let Africa actually have their waters back, to actually be able to fish them. Now, you could argue the differences on the Mediterranean side of things, but believe it or not, mostly down the western side of Africa is actually still fished only by Europeans. There are some instances where they let natives fish for local fish, so they can fish for themselves. But as Welshmith actually said, there is no industrialized fishing for Africans.
Yeah.
Which, as we well know, if you have some sort of form of currency or some sort of form of commodity, you can then change that and exchange that for a currency. So if you're able to fish your own fish, you can then sell it. And you can sell it in other African countries and make the actual African countries more wealthier. That's what the power of capitalism is supposed to do. But you have this level of whatever it is from the European Union that actually stops that, which increases immigration.
Yeah.
So when people say that we should have our borders, yes, we should, but we should also stop interfering in other countries. That's the reason why other countries have fucking borders.
I mean, that is the point. We cannot exploit them on the one hand and then complain about economic migrants on the other hand. I mean, yeah, if we don't want economic migrants, then we have to stop exploiting them. So that is all I'm saying. I don't want more immigrants, and yeah.
No, I'm completely with you. It's something that we would definitely agree on. I mean, we would agree on the differences of exploiting, but we do agree on the actual meaning of your point. My definition of exploiting would be stopping people from actually working. I don't know what yours would be on that aspect.
Yeah, stealing their resources is a kind of exploiting. Yeah, I mean,
no, I agree with you. But when some people say about mines and things like that, for instance, which are still mostly controlled by the governments in that country, it's the government that actually pays them a pittance when they're still actually getting, like, for instance, diamond mines.
Yeah.
Most of them are actually controlled by governments. If not controlled by governments, they're regulated by governments, and they
are also exploited by their own governments. There's no
Very
doubt.
much so.
But
Very
we
much
make
so.
trades with them. You know, we could also say, like, pay your people fairly, otherwise we will not trade with you. I mean, pretty much the same like we did with China. When these guys at Foxconn jumped out of the window, then we said we will not buy Apple products if you don't change the situation.
I agree.
But when it comes to Africa, nobody cares.
No, nobody cares enough because nobody knows their stories enough. The thing is with China is that they have their own mass media. And they're able to produce their own mass media. They're actually able to put the media out there. Within Africa, if you were to tell most people that supported the European Union for freedom of movement and economical standpoints, not the political side of things, I'll leave that out of it, but the economical restrictions that are placed across the whole of Europe and are implemented by Europeans to other countries. If you were to strip that power away from Europe, and just talking about the trade deals and things like that, if you were to strip that power away and was to actually give that back to the European countries rather than the superstate, you would actually be able to then renegotiate all the trade deals, which means that all the treaties that have already been put into place would have to be renegotiated, because you can't negotiate on Europe if there isn't a Europe state anymore. And that's the reason why I say superstate, because Europe negotiated the contracts and the trade deals against Africa, not individual countries. Yes, we all signed up for it, but individual countries didn't sign up for the trade deal themselves. They didn't implement it. So you could then say, well, us as England or us as Germany can go, we want the Ivory Coast to have their fishing back. We want Nigeria to have their fishing back. We want other countries that are on the coast to be able to have their fishing back, and we think that they should be able to have it. As long as we can use a proportion of it, they can have it all back and everything else like that, and they can sell their commodity. We would also like to buy and sell their stuff. But until that happens, as we've already agreed upon ourselves, immigration is going to be a lot higher and a lot harder, because you're not giving the countries its own chance to make its own wealth. Whether you believe in capitalism or socialism or communism, it doesn't matter in that aspect. If a country can't use its own resources, as what Welchman said, although we disagree on the premises of what we constitute as stopping them from using it, we agree on the premise that if you stop them from using their resources, you can't they have no way of making money.
Yeah. No, I totally agree.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So, open borders or no open borders?
No, for me, not. No, we should stop that madness.
No, that's fair enough. No open borders. I'm of the same ilk, same belief. I don't know how many people that we have watching us at this moment in time, but if anybody else wants to get on and have a word with either of us or make a known point or anything else like that, if you could message me on Twitter, I can drop you the link and you can join in and have a conversation with us. With that being said, there's not really too much to go forth. We both decided what we said and what we think is important and what aspects attribute to the ideas of immigration. Yes, we disagree, but surprisingly, we agree on a hell of a lot. And I think if more people are actually able to have an open discussion rather than talking about the ideologies behind the discussion, I think more people would understand that we are more similar than what we are apart. And I think that that's what we need to take away from conversations like this, to realize that people that have completely and utterly different opposing life views, I am mostly right-leaning. I'm not going to deny that. And I'm sure Will Smith will gladly tell you that he is mostly left-leaning or
Absolutely.
very left. I'll let him answer that, but I would classify him as very left. But that's how we can agree on things by talking. We have very similar outlooks on life. Yes, our reasonings are different, but we can get to the same answers by talking. I think that's very, very important.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it shouldn't be, many of these questions, it shouldn't be a question of left or right. I mean, the argument counts, and we should play the argument and not the person.
Yeah, no, I completely and utterly agree with that. It is definitely the fact that we should be playing the argument, the talking points, rather than the ideologies. The ideologies themselves are the ones that seem to me to be the problem. The ideologies themselves of, I'm a right winger, therefore you think this. It's the assumptions made by the ideologies that people are supposed to hold that destroy the narrative of the conversation, rather than just having the fucking conversation. At least that's in my experience.
No, absolutely. So do we have any guests, or?
I don't even think, I think it's just me and you watching the fucking stream, to be honest.
I guess we should wrap it because, we discussed every point, have we?
Pretty much. I mean, we both really agree on the idea and the premise of not having open borders. I mean, I know that you would say that you would still have the idea of open borders, but only for westernized countries and similar cultures. So I understand your premise. Me, myself, I still think that we should have closed borders for every country, regardless. If you have more,
I can live with that completely. It's not that I'm saying I would prefer open borders with countries that have the same living standards. What I said is that must be one of the rules. If you want to open the borders, then one of the first rules is that you can only do it between countries with similar living standards.
Yeah.
So, but in general, close the borders. Why not? I mean, they are not really closed. We can go to every country wherever we like. We only have to show a passport, and that is it.
Yeah. That is very true. That just stops people trying to. All it does is stop illegal immigration from happening rather than legal immigration. So no, I completely and utterly am with you on those points, and I think that somehow we've managed to come to the same conclusion. I don't know how this has happened, but I am very happy with it.
Next time we talk about Karl Marx. Let's see.
Oh dear. That did not go well.
No, we have that experience already.
As you well know, sir, I'm more than happy to talk to you yourself about anything. So I'm more than happy to do that. Would you like to promote your new channel at all, or
it's completely German. I mean, the name of my new channel is Detailverliebt. That means in love with detail, but it's completely in German, and so I guess for the majority of your audience, it makes no sense.
It makes no sense to me.
No, I think so. Yeah, I would like to invite you to my channel to have a chat about Brexit and explain my fellow countrymen what British people think about the Brexit, because our media obviously is very, very biased on that topic, and
Sure.
would like to have like a British perspective on that.
I would love to do that.
Great.
I would absolutely love to do that. Yeah, we've been on for roughly an hour. We don't seem to have anybody really talking to us in chat. I don't have any sort of messages coming through or anything else like that. So I think that's basically it, to be honest with you. For anybody that later on watches this and actually wanted to ask us what was going on, you fucking missed it. You missed your chance. Sorry. Bye-bye. But no, I'm very, very thankful for my guests for coming on today. It was very, very short notice that I actually asked people to come on. There was supposed to be a third person that was coming on, but due to other situations that's going on with them, they couldn't turn up. But I'm going to try and do at least once a month a topic-based discussion on a Sunday. If anybody actually wants to try and come up for a name with it as like a segue or a fancy name that I can put at the beginning or whatever, then please do. It'd be quite interesting. But no, I'd like to do sort of a talking narrative point or an ideological point or even a mythological point. I would be quite happy talking about anything. And anybody that does actually want to talk about that sort of stuff, if you want to message me on Twitter and tell me what your actual idea is and what your point is, I'd love to talk to you about it. It can be about anything anything mythological. It can be even a conspiratory basis if you fancied it. I just want to do thought experiments. I like the idea of going through the conversations with people and just having generalized conversations. I think those are the best ways of being able to break the divide of identity politics, because identity politics in itself is a cult. But that might be a discussion for another day. So with that being said, thank you very much. I'll speak to you all again real soon.